Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share Wendigo and Cryptids encounter stories. First story. This story was shared by you/JL Goodwin 1990. Be careful where you run off the road. That is one hell of a rainstorm. I looked up from the magazine I'd been reading to stare out the floor-to-ceiling windows lining the front wall of the service station. The sound of the downpour had been our soundtrack for the last 5 or 6 hours on shift, but it had turned extremely ferocious in the last hour or so. I could see the rain slashing across the pavement, driven by the wind. It lashed against the glass, making it extremely difficult to see out of. Let's just hope it doesn't cause another power outage, I thought, before answering. You're not kidding, Ralph, I said, feigning interest. We had plenty of driving rainstorms here in the Pacific Northwest, so much so that by now, after almost a decade and a half of living here, it had just become a regular occurrence to me. Ralph saw right through my charade, stepping to the other side of the counter and shooting me a look. You don't understand, Mick, and it may be because you haven't lived here that long, or you're just too young. I haven't seen a rainstorm like this since at least 1954. He used his hand to slick back his salt and pepper hair. Ralph was the owner of the gas station and repair shop I'd taken a cashier's job at, and had been the owner ever since his father had passed and left it to him when he was just 18 years old. Even though he was pushing 90, long past the age many people retired at, he seemed to be just like the damn Energizer Bunny and kept going. I'd never admit it, but I secretly hoped I could be like that when I was his age. He leaned over the counter, fumbling for a second before pulling out a battered and very well-worn portable radio. After a moment of setting up the antenna and fumbling with the dials, the constant blare of static was changed to the faint sound of a man speaking. And if you're just tuning in, ladies and gentlemen, we have an update on the storm currently swirling over central and southern Oregon. According to meteorologists, this winter has been one of the rainiest we've had in decades, which, on the one hand, is good for the forests after the fires which swept through the area a few years ago. On the other, it is causing multiple areas to become laden with power outages and automobile accidents. We're officially advising that, unless it is absolutely necessary, to please stay inside and avoid traveling until the worst of the storm has passed. In other news, the Seattle Mariners dash. Ralph turned the radio off, looking at me. You got anywhere to be tonight, Mick? He asked. I shook my head. Ever since Ruth Hine, my girlfriend, had decided to take a break in our relationship, I hadn't really had much to do over the winter, especially with my friends off in different states for college. He nodded, leaning to place the radio back under the counter. Then I'm going to suggest we stay open for a few more hours than usual, until the worst of this passes. I don't want you getting into an accident out there. I'll make sure to give you a little overtime pay for it, of course. I nodded gratefully, with inflation being the way it was, making everything from rent to car payments more expensive. I would take extra pay any day of the week. I'm perfectly okay with that, I declared, causing the old man to chuckle. Good, he said, now go back to the fridges and get us each a Coke. It's on the house. Allowing myself a small smile, I slid off the stool and left the cashier's island, heading to the refrigerators lining the back wall. I opened the glass door of one and pulled out 2 glass bottles of Mexican Coke. Ralph had gotten me hooked on the variation of the soda which used pure cane sugar instead of corn syrup, saying it was the closest to how it had used to taste in his youth. As I stepped back into the island and closed the partition behind me, I spared a look outside. What the? There was a figure running up the 2-lane road towards the station. What the hell is someone doing running outside in this crap? I dropped the 2 bottles on the counter, then tapped my knuckles on it to get Ralph's attention. "Hey Ralph, get a load of this," I called, pointing out the windows. He started as his gaze followed my finger to the figure. "What the," he mumbled, then spoke louder. "What the hell is someone doing out in this mess on foot?" Took the thoughts right out of my head, I thought. Before I had a chance to answer, the figure jogged under the awning for the gas pumps and across to the front door. He practically tore the door open, causing a howl of wind and large amount of rain to invade the store and spread across the tiled floor. The figure stepped inside, letting the door close behind them and the wind to dull back to a soft howl, bending almost in half and breathing heavily. I could see now it was a man, one who was soaked through to the bone. I could also tell he was extremely wealthy. The waterlogged black suit he had on looked like something you'd see in a Beverly Hills tailor shop, something you'd have to shell out over $4,000 or $5,000 for. His shoes looked like genuine crocodile leather or something, and what looked like a diamond stickpin was stuck into his tie. Finally, he stood up and looked at us. He looked utterly exhausted, but behind it was something that set me on edge. His eyes were full of panic. Ralph stepped forward. Can I help you in any way, sir?" he asked, trying to seem pleasant and not perturbed. The man held up a finger, still trying to breathe in great lungfuls of air and coughing out rainwater. "You've got to help me, sir," he began to stammer out. "I was trying to drive up from San Francisco to Seattle, when I got lost in the storm and took a wrong turn. My car went off the road about 10 or 12 miles back, and I couldn't get it out." His eyes held a more frantic pleading now. "Please, my wife and 2 kids are still in the car. They wouldn't have made it all the way in the storm. I told them I'd go for help." Ralph raised his hands in a placating manner. "Okay, sir, okay. Just try and calm down." He shot a glance out the window, then turned to me, his eyes serious. "Mick, go in the back to the phone and try and get a hold of the police while I speak more to our guest here." Obediently, I flipped back the island partition and walked quickly to the back room, where the store's inventory computer and landline phone were. I picked up the handset, hoping to hear a solid dial tone greet my ears. Instead, all I got was dead air. Great, the storm knocked the landlines out. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my cell phone, letting out a groan as I saw that no reception bars were displayed. "Of freaking course," I grumbled, then headed back to the front of the store. "No good, Ralph, the landline's dead, and I'm not getting any cell signal in this storm." I held up my phone and wiggled it for emphasis. The man became more frantic, almost clutching at Ralph's overalls. "Please, we have to do something, Ralph. I can't leave them out there all night." I admired Ralph's calmness as he gently pulled the man's hands off him. He let out a resigned sigh. "Okay, sir, my employee and I will go back with you to get your family. Tomorrow morning, I'll have him run out with the tow truck to bring your car back here. Does that sound okay?" The man began to cry tears of relief, mixing in with the rainwater all over his face. "Thank you. Thank you. Never will I say anything bad again about you rural folks." I raised an eyebrow at his choice of words, but held my tongue. "What's your name, sir?" Ralph asked him. "Charles." "Charles Winsome," he replied, reaching out and shaking his hand. "Well, Charles, unfortunately my employee's car won't make it on the back roads, so we'll have to take my wrecker, and since it's a regular cab, it'll be a little cramped on the drive back." The man, Charles, shook his head. "That's perfectly fine, sir," he said. Ralph pulled a ring of keys from his belt and tossed them to me. "Mick, go get the truck and bring it around to the front door. I'll lock up and figure out where Mr. Winsome's car is." Nodding, I left the counter and jogged out into the connected garage bays. Ralph's tow truck, an extremely well-kept 1952 Dodge Power Wagon, sat in the far bay, the two-tone black and tan paint glinting in the overhead lights and its tow hook swinging lazily. I hit the button to open the bay door, causing the wind and rain to roar in as I hopped behind the wheel and fired it up, the flathead inline-6 engine roaring in the bay. Jamming the truck into first gear, I pulled it out into the storm, hopping out into the driving rain to shut the bay door behind me before pulling the truck up next to the front door of the store. Through the rain-streaked glass, I saw Ralph and Charles dash out into the storm. Charles reached the truck first, pulling open the passenger door and climbing into the middle seat of the cab. Ralph followed a moment after, heaving himself into the passenger seat. As he slammed the door, something on his face gave me pause. There was a look there that I had only seen once or twice in the entire time I'd known him. Tension. Tension, and worry. He looked to me, nodding. "Start heading east on State Highway 38, he said simply, before turning his head to look out the windshield, past the rapidly flicking windshield wipers. The man usually couldn't shut up, even in bad situations. The fact he spoke so briefly made me feel increasingly on edge. The man told him something he didn't like hearing. I shook my head as I pulled the wrecker out onto the road. The hell had that thought come from? I pushed the thought away, focusing on keeping the truck in its proper lane as I squinted out past the rain which the old, vacuum-powered wipers did a poor job keeping off the glass. For what seemed to be 15 or 20 minutes, but felt more like 2 or 3 hours, we drove in silence, only broken by the roar of the truck's engine and the lashing rain. At this point, I couldn't even tell you where on the long stretch of rural highway connecting Reedsport and most of the coast to Interstate 5 we were. I hadn't seen a single other vehicle on the road, not even a cop car, which made me feel increasingly isolated. My mind began to drift off as I kept my foot down on the accelerator. It almost feels like we're the last 3 people alive on Earth, I thought. That thought was shattered as Charles pointed out the windshield ahead of us. "There, that's where I turned off," he exclaimed. I leaned forward, using a rag on the dash to wipe away some of the steam which the truck's defroster couldn't chase away. In perfect conditions, it would have been something which nobody would have glanced at, it was so perfectly camouflaged among the trees lining the side of the road. In the downpour, it was close to impossible. I'd have driven straight by if it hadn't been pointed out to me. I slowed, and even though I saw nobody else coming, put on my blinker out of a force of habit. I could now see deep tire tracks which had been formed into the dirt and mud recently. Those must be from Charles. I shook my head. Trust a city slicker to think that road would take him anywhere near civilization. I shot a glance at Ralph as I eased onto the gas and turned the truck onto the dirt road. I could barely see him in the dim glow of the truck's gauge lights, but I could tell his jaw was set tightly, his eyes flicking from one side of the tree line to the other. What the hell has the old man so on edge? I wondered. He caught me staring and nodded, motioning to keep going. I reached down and set the truck into 4-wheel drive, then flicked on the high beams before slowly beginning down the road. The trees rapidly closed in over our heads, melting the already dark, stormy night into an almost inky blackness only banished away by the headlights. I massaged the accelerator gently. Even with 4-wheel drive, I knew a dirt road like this would be easy to get stuck on in this weather, and the last thing we needed was for the rescuers to get stuck as well. Occasionally, a pine or fir tree branch would scrape against the roof of the truck, making an almost sickening sound, before banging off the tow assembly and hook on the back. There was one thing I was grateful for. The rainstorm seemed to be letting up somewhat, it was becoming easier to see out the windshield, and the truck was eating up the dirt ruts. I followed the tire tracks I saw in the mud, knowing, like breadcrumbs, they'd eventually lead us to their source. And as we rounded a corner, I spied it. In the bright yellow beam of the headlights, I could see the back end of the car peeking out from the side of the road where it had gone off. It was, indeed, an expensive car. It looked to be a brand new Bentley Flying Spur, something I'd only seen in YouTube videos and in car magazines. The hazard lights were on, lighting up the surrounding area in bright orange pulses. Charles let out a relieved sigh. Ah, thank God. I hope Desiree and the kids. He trailed off. Charles, what's the matter? Ralph asked him, but as we drew closer, I already saw what had made his sentence die away. Both of the rear doors, along with the front passenger door, stood wide open. I could see the expensive wood and leather was soaked from the rain, meaning they'd been left open for a fair while, at least. The overhead dome light of the car was on, and from this distance, I saw no movement inside. What the fuck? I whispered out as I brought the truck to a halt about 5 or 10 feet from the car. All at once, Charles turned and began pushing against Ralph. Let me out, he yelled, his voice almost painfully loud in the truck's cabin. Easy, Charles, easy, wait a minute. Ralph exclaimed, trying to hold the man back, but he'd already reached across to the door handle, pushing it open and beginning to crawl across him. A moment later, he dropped out of sight, falling to the ground with a squelching sound from the mud. I could hear him swearing as he fought to get to his feet. I began to open the driver's door when Ralph grabbed my arm. Mick, stay close to the truck, he said, in more of a stern voice than I was used to. I shot a look at him, his warning sending a small shiver up my spine. Why? I asked cautiously after a moment. He didn't answer me, only pushing the half-open passenger door all the way open and hopping out. After a moment's hesitation, I leaned down, fumbling under the driver's seat for what I knew the old man stashed there. My hand came up a moment later holding an old, well-oiled and well-taken-care-of revolver. I had been sent out on several tow jobs when Ralph or the other mechanics couldn't do it, sometimes to less than ideal towns around the area. I'd been told it was there if I needed to protect myself. Now kinda seems like one of those times, I thought as I twisted the door handle and launched myself out into the rainy night. The storm had definitely let up a bit now. The rain had slacked off, though it still hit my face and exposed hands hard enough to sting slightly. I tucked the revolver into my waistband, slamming the door and fighting my way through the mud and muck which had once been the road. Stepping around to the front, I positioned myself between the two headlights and looked around. I could tell instantly that something felt off. Even during a rainstorm, you can still hear the sounds of the forest all around you. Animal calls, crickets and cicadas, things of that nature. But aside from the wind and rain, I couldn't hear anything besides the rumble of the wrecker's engine idling. It felt like the entire forest was holding its breath, and it made another shiver surge through me. Attempting to focus, I took a few steps forward, seeing Ralph come into view in my peripheral vision. Charles had already made it to the back of the Bentley, reaching out and gripping the rear quarter panel with one muddy hand. Desiree. I heard him call, Maxwell, Chloe. He stuck his hand into the car's cabin for a moment, then pulled it back out. "They wouldn't have left the car," he exclaimed, looking back at us as if we had the answers he searched in vain for in his own mind. "Where the hell did they go?" I saw him look further down the road, then out into the forest. "Desiree," he screamed, cupping his hands over his mouth. "Max, Chloe." After a moment, he began down the steep hill. The car leaned halfway over onto the forest floor below. "Charles, wait!" Ralph yelled after him, but he seemed to either not hear him, or ignored him. For a moment, Ruthine's face flashed through my mind, her platinum blonde hair soaked with rain and her blue eyes peering around worriedly. I knew how I'd feel if I'd come across my car in a state like this, with the passenger door wide open after leaving her safely inside. The emotions the image carried pushed away Ralph's warning, along with any negative feelings I had about the wealthy man, and I struggled forward until I, too, reached the Bentley. I heard the quiet rumble of its engine still running, and spared a glance inside, seeing no sign of life among the brown leather and wood. Then, I reached down to my belt and pulled a waterproof flashlight from it. Clicking it on, I shone it down to where Charles had gone. I saw him, standing among the ferns and looking around frantically. He looked up at me, then motioned for me to join him. "Come on, I see footprints down here. We'll find them quicker with the flashlight." Without thinking, I braced myself and began sliding down the hill. "Mick, wait!" I heard Ralph shout. I heard a hint of desperation in his voice, along with something else. Was that fear? It made me hesitate as I continued sliding down. I'd never heard the man have any fear in his voice before. But it was already too late. I'd reached the bottom of the hill, coming to a stop next to Charles. He pointed down, and I aimed my flashlight, seeing an adult's footprints, along with two smaller sets clearly visible in the soft earth, filled with water. I followed them with the beam, seeing they led away into the woods. I spared a quick glance back up at Ralph. He hadn't moved from the top of the hill, still looking down at us. I couldn't see his face in the dark, but his body seemed tensed up. It made mine do the same, and I looked around, for a moment feeling like there were eyes on me. But I saw nothing. "Come on," Charles said, tapping my shoulder and beginning to follow the tracks. I let out a deep breath, then pulled the revolver from my waistband. Gripping it tightly in my wet hand, I followed, slowly. We only made it about 50 feet into the forest when he stopped. "Wah!" I heard him breathe out, and hearing the fear and confusion in his voice, I hurried to his side. When I reached him, I again aimed my flashlight beam down. And felt a similar sense of confusion wash over me like a wave. The three sets of footprints ended abruptly here. I flashed the beam around, before aiming it back down. They didn't go off in any other direction, and unless all three had pulled a Danny Torrance and walked backwards in their own footsteps, they hadn't gone back. It's like they just disappeared. The thought made the uneasy feeling I had welling up inside me amplify, and I again was overcome with the feeling of being watched. This time, however, it did not go away when I looked up. If anything, it intensified. Tendrils of fear began to creep up on me over the uneasiness, though I couldn't tell why. That's when Charles spoke. "Hey, is it ever this still out in the woods?" he whispered to me. I shook my head. No, it's never this still." I looked around. "Something's not right here, man. We should go back to the truck. Try and call the cops again, get them out here." They'll have an easier time finding your wife and kids than we will." He looked at me, a look of despair and fear etched across his face, but eventually he nodded at me, and we turned and began to slog back towards the hill. "Daddy," both of us stopped dead in our tracks at the sound. It had been quiet, almost too quiet to hear over the rain and wind, but the stillness around us allowed it to bleed through. I felt the strongest chill go up my spine, forcing me to let out a gasp of air. I saw Charles turn around rapidly. For a few moments, there was silence, then, "Daddy," that had been a different voice, a little girl's voice. "Max?" Charles whispered out into the night. "Chloe." Silence for a few more seconds. "Help us, Daddy," came the whisper from somewhere off to our right. "Charles," came a low, husky woman's voice from off to our left. I suddenly felt as though I was a cowboy in a western movie, who had just realized he'd stupidly walked blindly into an ambush. Or some dumbass in a horror movie who went to investigate a noise, knowing they'd likely get disemboweled. I couldn't tell why, but the three voices which kept whispering at us just sounded wrong. They sounded off, it wasn't by much, but just enough to be noticeable. Apparently, not to Charles, though. He turned to me and snatched the flashlight out of my hands, then began to run back the way we'd come from. "Sweetheart, kids, wherever you are, follow my voice," he screamed. Suddenly, I heard Ralph's voice loudly and roughly call out from behind me. "Mick, get the fuck back up here, now." His use of the F-bomb startled me. The man was old-fashioned to a T, and that included rare, if any use of swearing. It sent a new staple of fear through me, and I began to back up towards the sound of his voice. "Ch Charles." I called out, but just as quickly, the sound died in my throat as I saw a faint light appear, first from one direction, then another, until I saw multiple faint blue lights coming in our direction from everywhere out in the forest. I felt my jaw drop open as I stared at what emerged into view. "What the fuck?" I cried out. If you're old enough to remember analog television, you'll remember how, when nasty storms came through the area, it would cause the screen to fuzz in and out with static and snow. How, faintly through it, you could sometimes see the figures of the people on the screen, just an outline visible. That's what they looked like. I could see the faint, human-like outlines as they almost seemed to glide forward just above the ground. But, there were no definitive features to them. Instead, their bodies seemed to comprise of actual static. I could see the flickering lines move from one side of their figure to another. I couldn't see any eyes, either, but I got the definite feeling they could see just fine. In my mind, I'd pictured Wendigos or something appearing from the tree-line to leap at us when the feeling of fear had washed over me. But the feeling these things gave off was infinitely worse. I have never felt such dread and fear in my life as I watched them approach us. That was when I began to hear the whispering. It was soft, like a lover calling to their partner from the bedroom, but it held such sinisterness to it that I almost felt as though I'd piss myself. I heard first a single whisper, then another, until it became almost a deluge of overlapping whispers. I couldn't tell what they were saying, and I honestly am thankful for that. I already wake up in a cold sweat almost every night just from the inaudible whispers in my dreams already. And then a distinct whisper cut through them. "Daddy," it was a little boy's voice, and instantly, I knew it had to belong to Charles's son, because of his reaction. He stumbled forward more, and I heard him begin to sob. "Max," he whimpered out. "Join us, Daddy," I heard the whisper of a little girl call. The woman's voice spoke again. "It's so beautiful, Charles." Join all of us, so we can be a family. Forever, I saw the man fall to his knees as the flickering shapes began to encircle him. Charles, run! I yelled out, still backing away slowly. But he didn't. Instead, he dropped to his knees, now loudly sobbing. I yelled at him again. Charles, get the fuck out of there. At the same time, I heard Ralph yelling for me to run, but I was too transfixed on the sight in front of me. By now, I could see there had to be 20 or 30 of the shapes gliding out of the forest. In the front, I could see what looked like an adult woman-sized figure, and 2 smaller ones behind it. Oh, my God! I opened my mouth to yell for Charles to run again. But it was already too late. The 3 figures had reached him, while the others slowly closed the circle they'd formed around him. I couldn't hear the woman and children's voices whispering from the cacophony anymore, but Charles must have been able to, because he began crying out. I didn't desert you. I told you I was going for help. I told you all to wait in the car. And then he tumbled onto the ground. Between the flickering figures, I saw him curl into a ball, could hear him sobbing loudly. The circle of figures had reached him, and almost as one they began to lean down over him. I couldn't tell what they did to him next, and I think I was blessed to not have. But I heard him begin to scream. It was the most frightened, pained, agonizing scream I've ever heard a man, no, a human being, ever let out in my life. It was as if you were being simultaneously burned alive, tortured, and slashed all at the same time. It felt like it lasted forever, though in reality it had to be less than 10 seconds. Then, all of a sudden, the screaming stopped. The whispering stopped. The forest went entirely still again, a deadly silence this time. I had frozen still at the man's scream, and barely letting out any breaths, I slowly brought up my right foot and stepped backwards, trying to make as little noise as possible. Crack. I froze as my foot came down on a branch, the sound of it breaking shattering the stillness. Oh, no. I knew I'd just made a terrible mistake. The figures had still been crouched over where they'd done, whatever they'd done to Charles. But now, one stood back up, turning to look at me. It was close enough now that I could see something, which, to this day I wish I hadn't been able to. From a distance, I'd thought they had no visible eyes. But now, I could tell it did. They stood out among the flickering blue static, because they were as black as coals. As black as I felt the deepest pits of hell must look like. And they held a twisted, predatory look in them, the way a tiger might gaze at its next meal. Oh, fuck me, I whispered out as more of them stood back up and looked at me, raising the revolver to point at them. I doubted that it would do anything to them, but I was not going to go down without a fight. That's when I heard a whisper cut through the rain. Mickey, I felt frozen to the spot, and I swallowed hard. Ruthine. I forced out between my lips. I knew she wasn't anywhere near here. She was up the coast at her friend's house in Florence. And yet, I know I heard her voice. The British accent had been unmistakable. Mickey, help me, her voice called out again. For a split second, I swore I saw her face appear out of the blue static in one figure's face, and I felt myself begin to cry. No, how is that possible? Mick, listen to me, turn and run, my boy, before they get to you. Ralph screamed, his voice snapping me out of the trance-like state I'd been in. Ruthine's face disappeared from the figure, and I saw them begin to move towards me. I felt in control of my feet again, and I turned, feeling as vulnerable as ever, having my back to the things, and began sprinting through the grass, moss and muck. It felt like a mile to the hill, but a few seconds later, I slammed into the wet grass and began to climb, my fingers digging into and tearing away the ground at times. The revolver began to impede my grasp, and I dropped it, hearing it fall away back down the hill. I was halfway up, when I heard Ralph call again. "Climb, Mick. Don't look back, just keep climbing." For whatever dumb reason, I still don't know why, hearing that made me do the complete opposite and look down, back towards the bottom of the hill. And I screamed. All of the figures had reached the bottom, and were beginning to climb rapidly after me. One thing I could tell now as they used their hands to dig into the soil, was that their hands ended, in what looked like black claws. "Oh, fuck my life," I screamed inside my own head. And then I felt a hand seize the collar of my jacket. I screamed louder as I felt something drag me up the hill roughly, until I was lying on my back in the mud of the dirt road. Ralph's terrified face appeared over me, and he reached his hand out. After a moment's confusion, I shot my own out and took it, being dragged to my feet by the old man with more strength than I ever knew he had. "Get back to the truck," he yelled, then shoved me forward. I didn't hesitate this time. I turned and sprinted for the truck, hearing him following close after me. Grasping at the handle, I tore the driver's door open and hauled myself up into the cab, Ralph doing the same on the other side. We slammed the doors shut, and I reached down, grabbing the shifter in shaking hands and almost wrenching it into reverse. As I did, I glanced up and out the windshield. And screamed again. The Bentley was completely surrounded by the figures. There were even more now than there had been at the bottom of the hill. I don't know exactly how many, but I'd say at least 50 of them, if not more. They stood, their bodies shimmering as their cold black eyes watched us. Then they began to move forward. "Go," I heard Ralph weakly call out through ragged gasps due to running, and I slammed my foot down on the accelerator, the thick, chunky off-road tires digging into the dirt and mud, shooting the truck backwards. Slowly, the shimmering shapes began to fade away in the distance. Why they never followed, I'll never know. Maybe they knew they couldn't catch us. Or maybe they'd already had enough with their prize, Charles. All I know is I kept my foot down, until I was able to turn the truck around, and then tore down the dirt road until we came back to the main road. I'm fairly certain I never let up off the gas until the two of us made it back to the station, where we both spent the rest of the night. The next morning, when the phone lines came back on, Ralph telephoned the police. He told them Charles had come through the station, asking for help. But, instead of telling the truth about taking him back, he strangely lied, something he didn't ever do, and told them he'd ducked back out after he'd refused, and headed back the way he'd come. When I asked him why he'd done that, he refused to say anything. The only thing he would tell me was this: "I've lived in this area for almost a century, Mick. The forests out here hold some secrets that should never be known. And they contain creatures that humans should never come across." When I pressed him how he knew about whatever those things had been, all he would say is that he'd seen them once before, many years ago, while out hiking with someone. He wouldn't tell me who. But the photo I've seen on his desk, one of a much younger version of himself, standing with his arm around a smiling young woman I've never seen before, one wearing an identical wedding ring to the one I've always seen on his hand, gives me an idea. The cops found the Bentley the next day, the doors still open as they had been that night. They found the footsteps leading down the hill. They even found Ralph's revolver, the sheriff giving it back to him a week later with a strange, knowing look. But they never found a trace of Charles, or his wife and children. I honestly knew they wouldn't. It's been almost 4 months since that hellish night. I'm still working for Ralph, as the man saved my life that night. I could never repay him enough for it. Besides, now he's hired someone else to run the tow truck when he or the mechanics can't make it out there. For that, I'm grateful. I could never step into the cab again. I tried once, but the memories of that night caused me to begin shaking uncontrollably. But, aside from that, things have slowly begun to get back to normal. Well, as normal as you can when you know there are things like them in this world. I know I'll never know what they are. And I honestly don't want to. I just hope over time, the horrors of that night will slide from my conscious memory. I'm back with Ruth now, having convinced her to get back together. I don't tell her I hear the whisper of her voice calling to me from that shimmering figure, almost every night in my dreams. I honestly can't help but think often about Charles, and his wife and kids. Part of me hopes that they're simply all dead, long gone from this world in a place where they're together and at peace. Another part of me fears that out there, among the dozens of those things which search the forest for more victims, there are now 4 new shimmering, static-like figures which walk amongst them. Second story. This story was shared by u/aware_chemistry7235. My dreams of the Wendigo. Personally, my view on the Wendigo is I don't believe it until I'm in a situation. I do believe it exists in terms of cannibals. My obsession with the Wendigo has gotten me weird looks from people and being made fun of. I think if it was real I would be possessed, but am not. I have dreamt of the Wendigo 3 times this week, one on Sunday, another on Tuesday, and another on Wednesday. Sunday's nightmare was one of the worst nights of my life. I had a dream I was in a thick northern forest. There was a house light gray in color with a porch facing the forest. I never saw the behind of it. In my dream I was hunted by a group of Wendigos. The most wretched I have ever seen. They had the color of a baby's skin. Pink and veiny. They had hollow eyes that did not reflect light and no antlers, but a bald head with sharp teeth and a lipless mouth. They had a large rib cage that had no organs inside it and was hollow. They walked on all 4s. And they were calling to me. Come out wherever you are. I was hiding in the foliage as I was being hunted. In my dream they turned people into Wendigos by attacking them. Like rip-off zombies. Right as I ran to the house I saw them cross the edge of the clearing, one with black hair and the other with no hair. The one with the dark hair had white eyes that appeared soulless and looked almost like a child. For some reason it looked like it was going through the transformation as it looked more human, the other one. Then a man, middle-aged in appearance who was eerily calm, walked onto the porch with a gun and said, "It'll be all right." Next it cuts to me panicking as the one with hair climbs over the railing right in front of me. Oddly enough I felt super cold, not in the temperature way, but like in the atmosphere way. Like, you know when people give off an atmosphere when they're mad, like you are choking on it. It was sort of like that. Then my dream cuts out. The second dream, which for some reason was one of best dreams, oddly, I was a Wendigo but in full control. I was starving but I never killed anyone. Strangely enough I wasn't the ones from the previous night. This time I looked like the one from the movie Antlers, with no eyes despite seeing perfectly. I remember being in my Grammy's house. I was far too large to even fit inside the doorway, which I asked myself how I even fit inside. I was trying to write in Native American with my finger by scraping on the floor for some reason, even though I didn't know how to. Then for some reason this girl, Mexican in appearance, told me that's not how to write it. I asked how and I never got an answer. I remember I hunted large animals for food, like bison for some reason. I killed them the same way the Wendigo in the movie Antlers killed Clint the Bully. I hid on tree branches and jumped down on them. I was more muscular than the Wendigo from the movies and I had more hair. There is a lot more to the dream, but I only wrote the things I could remember the best. In the third dream that happened last night, I was in another dream with the Wendigo. But the entire focus wasn't on it this time. I only saw it for a glimpse and then it vanished. But the dream involved SCP-001 when day breaks. It was one of the worst dreams I had since Monday. But that's not important. In the past I have had dreams of Wendigos. One dream I had, I was in my house and I looked out the window and it was snowing, which it never does where I live. The trees and grass was covered in about 11 inches of snow and I remember it being insanely cold despite the fact that the door was closed. It was snowing outside and a blizzard was raging. I'm going to simplify this a lot, but there was a Wendigo right outside the window that looked through with glowing yellow eyes with a lipless mouth and frostbite on its body. It was insanely tall even though it was on all fours. The best way to describe it was that it looked like the country road creature that was made by Trevor Henderson. It looked like it was walking on top of the snow. Next thing it screeches and breaks through the glass and the dream ends. I have heard stories that those who dream of the Wendigo are cursed by it and will transform. In real life the forest behind my house is scary. It is very dense and I have never been in it even though it is in my yard. I always feel like I'm being watched every time I go in my backyard, so I never stay out for long. My dog is the only one who goes into the forest and is always searching for something but never comes back with anything. His ears are always perked up. I swear I'm not lying. I can tell it smells terrible in the forest because every time my dog comes back he smells like he's a dead corpse. I'm scared of what's in there and I'll never go in. Thank God I'm moving soon. Edit. I have had two other dreams. One is short, the other one is long. The first starts with someone walking in a forest in the middle of a forest holding a shotgun. I never get to see their face, just the side of them. It goes quiet. In lightning fast pace, a Wendigo runs up behind them and bites the side of them, making a crunching/tearing noise. Then it ends. The other is way too long to explain in this, plus I'm too lazy to write it now. It looked something like this though. Third story. This story was shared. Posted by you/Daisy Duck. Jin, my first encounter. Hello. I have many stories to share. This is only one of them. I'm a Middle Eastern woman residing in one of the Arab Gulf states. Though considered Muslim, my family has never observed religious commandments. The only time I saw my father pray was once in the month of Ramadan, about 20 years ago, when I was 6 years old. Me and my younger brother were so fascinated by this strange ritual we were seeing our father perform that our absorbed staring made my father burst into laughter and order us out of the room so he could pray in peace. Though we were not religious, I remember my mother introducing us to some topics related to religion. One was the stories of the different prophets. I remember liking the Prophet Yusuf because I was fascinated by the idea of someone so beautiful you'd accidentally cut your hands as you peeled fruit in your awe of their beauty, also because my kid mind concluded that the palm lines on our hands were a result of those spellbound women cutting up the palms of their hands. I don't know why I thought that. My mother also taught us about the different creatures God created. The angels, from light, humans, from dirt, and Iblis, arch nemesis of humanity, from fire. She never mentioned anything about the jinn. I don't remember who warned me first. Perhaps no one did. When I started first grade, all of us students somehow knew not to use the washroom designated for us first graders. The school I went to from first to fourth grade was a small one. We had one social worker for all of school population. I can't remember for sure, but I think there were only 3 classes for each level. The first grade level was situated outside, as in, when you went outside the classroom the sky was your ceiling. The second, third and fourth grades on the other hand were situated inside the school building. The shared washroom of the first grade level was in a separate small building behind the small building that contained our classrooms. Early on in the school year, I remember sitting in a circle at recess, with a bunch of my classmates, as one girl told us the score. The jinn, you can't see them, but they live in bathrooms. In cupboards, too, but mainly in bathrooms. Don't stay long in any bathroom when you use it, don't sing in it, and don't make loud noises or stare at yourself in the mirror for too long. Be careful not to slip and fall, if you do you might accidentally fall on a jinn, they will be mad. Do your business and leave, quickly. Don't bring toys or stuffed animals into the bathroom. Make sure not to let the door to the bathroom open. If you follow these rules you will be fine. We have a lot of jinn in our house, that's how I know these things. She went on, if you leave them alone and don't offend them, then they will leave you alone and won't hurt you. But the washroom here, it's no good. The jinn there are already angry with us. Never go to our washroom. Hold it until you get home, that's safer for you. For the life of me I can't remember the name of that girl. I ended up visiting her once, the first of 2 times my mother allowed me to visit a friend in the course of my childhood, but that's a story for another day, and yet her name escapes me. All I remember is me staring into her face as she spoke, and being transfixed by the weight of her words and the color of her eyes. She was the only girl in our class with light eyes. They were a mesmerizing mixture of hazel and green. None of us talked about the angry jinn in the first graders' washroom for the most part, but when we did it was in whispers. Don't talk about it out loud, and don't talk about it for long. If you do they will come for you, maybe even at your own home, in your own bed, in the middle of the night. After one too many incidents of students wetting themselves or sneaking into the bathrooms designated for the older kids, our class teacher, in the presence of the school principal and the social worker, tried to reassure us, first with words. The jinn, like Iblis, are created from fire, she told us. They, just like humans, have the capacity to choose to do good or evil. They lived in an invisible world of their own. They only appear to prophets and holy men, though. So no, they don't live in the school washroom. Instinctively, we knew better. The adults were lying to us. When she saw that her empty words meant nothing to us, our class teacher decided to go with the punishment route. Whoever was heard talking about the jinn in the washroom, or wet themselves because they were afraid of the jinn in the washroom, or snuck into the older kids' washroom was summoned to the front of the class, scolded in front of everyone for telling stories, or stupidly believing lies/breaking the rules, and then hit 10 times on each palm of their hands with the dreaded wooden ruler. The plastic ruler was usually used when we got punished, the wooden ruler was for especially bad misbehavior. And the metal ruler was supposedly used to dole out the most severe punishments, though I'm not sure our teacher ever used it. The fear of punishment meant that we talked even less about the threat we knew to exist, and devised ways not to have to use the washroom at school. For my part, I made sure to drink very little water during school hours. Some classmates made a pact with each other. If you just had to go to the washroom, wait till recess. Take 2 friends with you to the washroom, so that while you got inside the stall to do your business, they were outside reassuring you that you were not left alone with the jinn, and they were ready to sprint and call for help if need be. One fateful day I had no money to buy the usual chocolate or cheese croissant from the canteen at recess, and so I decided to drink the big strawberry juice box a friend offered me so I wouldn't go hungry for the rest of the school day. Our system at school at the time consisted of 6 periods. These started from 8 a.m. and ended at 2 p.m. After the 3rd period, at about 11:30 a.m., we had recess for half an hour, or so I remember. That day, I felt the discomfort of a full bladder by the 5th period. I tried to project a calm exterior, but inside I was starting to panic a little bit. I told myself that I could make it till I reached home. When the bell rang and the last period began, our grade's much-hated PE teacher entered the class and informed our class teacher that our class was to report to the nurse's office for our scheduled vaccination. I can't remember what we were to be vaccinated for, to be honest. At the sound of that I became really distressed, and my bladder felt like it would release its content at any moment, though I still tried to hide it to the best of my ability. We were organized into lines and marched to the nurse's office, where we found the 1st graders from the other 2 classes there as well. There we stood in queue to get our injections. I stood last and felt like I could not handle one more second. I started shivering despite all my attempts at self-control. The PE teacher looked at me with derision and mockingly asked me if I was scared of the injection. I shook my head no, and she laughed. She then asked me why I was shaking if I wasn't scared. That caught the attention of our class teacher, who noticed me shivering, and so did the other girls. By then I was about to pee myself. I was so scared of that happening because then I knew I was going to get punished by my teacher in front of everyone, and in those days the physical pain of corporal punishment terrified me, and that I would also be mocked mercilessly by my PE teacher, who would use it to humiliate me every PE period, which she did to other girls. That's when I said that I needed to use the bathroom. Frowning, my class teacher told me to go quickly and then come back straight for my shot. I wanted to ask her to let someone come with me to the washroom and then thought better of it. I went out of the nurse's office feeling strange. I felt numb but was panicking at the same time. I thought of going to the older kids' bathroom but was so scared I was going to get caught. The accursed washroom was a 5-minute walk away from the nurse's office. Since all the 1st graders, accompanied with their teachers, were getting their vaccinations, and our classrooms were far from the other levels' classrooms, no students or teachers would be around the washroom when I got there. I would be all alone there, just me and the jinn. As I contemplated these thoughts my legs did not stop moving. It was as if I was in one of those dreams where dread fills your heart and you know you are walking to your doom but you can't do anything to stop yourself, except this was reality. I reached my classroom and then walked around the building. When the washrooms building came to sight I stopped. It wasn't run down, of course, but it was an old building with faded and peeling white paint. I could feel my heart start to sink and my brain screamed at me to turn back and leave. But I felt like there was no way out for me. The adults were giving me no choice, and I was just a scared child. I switched myself to autopilot, and my legs just moved. I entered the washrooms building and shut the door gently behind me. It was a swinging door and so I could not leave it open. The washroom had a strange smell. Not particularly foul, but not nice either. Everything was faded shades of lime green. There were 6 stalls and they were all open. 3 of them had Arabic-style toilets and then the other 3 were Western-style toilets. I instinctively went for Western-style toilets, because that's what we had at home and because I made a split-second decision that the Arabic-style toilets, which you had to squat over, would leave me exposed much more than the Western-style toilet. I entered the stall, closed the door, sat on the toilet and started to pee. My bladder was very full and it was taking me some time to empty it, and as seconds went by I was losing the numbness and the fear was starting to foreground itself more and more in my brain. When I was finally done I washed up and dried myself, but I hesitated to flush the toilet. Would the noise that caused make the jinn angry? I quickly decided to close the lid of the toilet as a compromise and then got out of the stall and closed its door behind me. I went to the basin to wash my hands quickly and get out of there, intent on making as little noise as possible. As soon as I turned on the water though, my eye caught the mirror in front of the basin and I noticed something. All the doors of the stalls were closed. I froze for a moment. All the stall doors were open when I got in, I knew they were. There were no footsteps of anything other than me during all the time I was in the washroom. As the horror of that realization dawned at me I heard a creak. I watched in utter horror as the door to the stall that I used started slowly opening. As the door was opening I glimpsed the lid of the toilet, the one I had closed, upright and open, and then I bolted out of there. Never ran so fast in my life. I don't remember much of what happened that day. I only remember that I was sick for a week. I didn't want to stay home from school though, because that meant I would have to stay home alone till noon, since both my parents worked and my other siblings would be at school. I remember being so scared to tell anyone at school, for fear they would tell the teacher and I would get punished. I ended up only telling my light-eyed friend. She knew the truth and so my secret was safe with her. 4th story. This story was shared by you/_Mothman. I am a nurse for victims of horrors. If you're interested at all in how I came to be employed at this sort of hospital I might go over that in my next post. If that kind of thing doesn't really matter to you, let me go on to tell you about one of my first patients and what I really do. You see, the job is at its core just a job. I'm a male nurse at a hospital you should pray to God every night that you will never visit. Its name is Dearth Mercy Hospital. Pronounced like dirty H. My job is patient care, but unlike every other hospital in the world, patient care comes second at Dearth Mercy. Self-preservation comes first. That's because we don't deal with things a regular hospital takes care of. You can't come here with a bad cough, unless of course, it's related to inhaling dust from a cursed antique store. I've seen it. You don't just get sent here after a car accident, unless you hit a creature that wails like a siren when in pain and causes your eardrums to explode. No, the kind of patients we get are the ones babbling about how they should have followed set rules. Look, before all this I wouldn't have cared either way, but if you've seen some of the things I've seen, Jesus people follow the rules. We also see some variation/subclass of a Wendigo that has killed your friends and has your scent. That one's pretty common. And a lot of people generally get sent to our psych wards because of the PTSD that comes with being a victim of horror. One guy accidentally created some kind of AI in one of his games he was developing. He felt so bad for what his game did to the AI that he tried to kill himself. One kid befriended a sort of avenging child abuse creature thing named Rasp that killed his father and a kid he went to school with, so now the kid is afraid if he's accidentally rude to anyone that Rasp will come for him. I've seen a lot of crazy. But one of my first patients was a guy that had growths inside of him, not tumors or anything like that. This was some kind of living thing inside of him that fed off of what he was eating. I wish it just ate his normal diet, but it made him crave things normal people shouldn't be craving. At the first hospital he was medicated with who knows what and sent home when the docs there just thought he was getting fat since nothing showed up on the ultrasound. Eventually though, he was sent to dearth. Mercy. Someone at his regular hospital recognized that he was a victim of some kind of horror, and they acted as a liaison to get him to us. That person probably saved this man's life. The patient, named Derek, don't worry about HIPAA or anything like that, everything has been adjusted for privacy, while he came in complaining of stomach pains. Obviously, like I said, nobody gets sent to this hospital for regular stuff, so we knew it was something more. When he came in, he was clutching a half-eaten and rotting carcass of what looked like a cat. He was literally talking to us in between bites. It was a strange conversation. "Sir, is that your cat?" I asked him, thoroughly grossed out because this was my first real patient at Dearth Mercy. He lifted the cat and looked at it. "This? God no, I wouldn't eat mittens. This is, well, I don't want to say, it's disgusting." The other nurse with me, Archie, made a face. "Sir, you're eating a cat, what can be more disgusting than that?" I was kind of shocked he said that because I was taught bedside manners at my previous hospitals. But Archie had a point. "I know it's a cat," the patient exploded. "You think I don't know that? It's roadkill, okay? Cats, deer, dogs, coons, I can't stop myself from eating whatever I see on the side of the road. I'm gonna throw up." He leaned over to puke, and what came next was even worse than what he had just told me. He threw up all right, but something whipped out of his throat along with the vomit. It was like a tentacle, and it literally caught the bits of cat and bile before it could hit the ground, and pulled it all back into his throat. The man made a nasty slurring and gobbling sound as it went straight back into him. I thank God did not have any tentacles inside me, so when I reactively threw up, it all did hit the ground. I couldn't stop it. Seeing that, smelling that, I didn't stand a chance. Archie wasn't new, it didn't make him throw up, but he did step back from us and point to the bin. "Jesus, aim for the fucking can next time," he ordered. "Sorry," I said. I looked at the patient who was eyeing my spill on the floor. "You didn't eat meat today, did you?" he asked. His eyes begged me to say no. Thankfully I hadn't. "Just eggs and toast," I replied. He sighed relief, then took a bite of the cat in his hand. Archie proceeded to get the man's personal information while I cleaned up my mess. We followed the standard protocol of any hospital, minus the insurance parts, and after the basics, we asked the unique questions. Have you come into contact with any cursed items? Have you made any deals with demons, genies, witches, minor deities or gods, etc.? Have you consumed human flesh in the last 48 hours? Have you seen anything strange or unusual outside of your current symptoms? Have you recently moved to a new town/house where strange things occur? This one was a hit. Yes. New town. I thought it was just a weird group or something at first, but they pray to a streetlight in the mornings, he said, chewing on the meat of the cat. Archie turned to me. By now my sickness was cleaned up and I was standing by learning. So, some towns generally have either a cult or even the whole town. They'll have a deal with a creature or horror of some kind and have to perform some kind of ritual. It's important to get as much info on the ritual as we can so the lab can determine what the horror is and how to treat it. Then he handed me the clipboard. You finish this, I'll see if Dr. Mathos is available. Then he exited the room, calmly and casually as if he saw things like this all the time. I know now that's exactly the case. I turned to Derek and offered a friendly reassuring smile. Okay, can you tell me what time they pray to the light? I asked. Fourth story. This story was shared by you/_Mothman. I am a nurse for victims of horrors. If you're interested at all in how I came to be employed at this sort of hospital, I might go over that in my next post. If that kind of thing doesn't really matter to you, let me go on to tell you about one of my first patients and what I really do. You see, the job is at its core just a job. I'm a male nurse at a hospital you should pray to God every night that you will never visit. Its name is Dearth Mercy Hospital. Pronounced like dirty H. My job is patient care, but unlike every other hospital in the world, patient care comes second at Dearth Mercy. Self-preservation comes first. That's because we don't deal with things a regular hospital takes care of. You can't come here with a bad cough, unless of course, it's related to inhaling dust from a cursed antique store. I've seen it. You don't just get sent here after a car accident, unless you hit a creature that wails like a siren when in pain and causes your eardrums to explode. No, the kind of patients we get are the ones babbling about how they should have followed set rules. Look, before all this I wouldn't have cared either way, but if you've seen some of the things I've seen. Jesus people follow the rules. We also see some variation/subclass of a Wendigo that has killed your friends and has your scent. That one's pretty common. And a lot of people generally get sent to our psych wards because of the PTSD that comes with being a victim of horror. One guy accidentally created some kind of AI in one of his games he was developing. He felt so bad for what his game did to the AI that he tried to kill himself. One kid befriended a sort of avenging child abuse creature thing named Rasp that killed his father and a kid he went to school with, so now the kid is afraid if he's accidentally rude to anyone that Rasp will come for him. I've seen a lot of crazy. But one of my first patients was a guy that had growths inside of him, not tumors or anything like that. This was some kind of living thing inside of him that fed off of what he was eating. I wish it just ate his normal diet, but it made him crave things normal people shouldn't be craving. At the first hospital he was medicated with who knows what and sent home when the docs there just thought he was getting fat since nothing showed up on the ultrasound. Eventually though, he was sent to Dearth Mercy. Someone at his regular hospital recognized that he was a victim of some kind of horror, and they acted as a liaison to get him to us. That person probably saved this man's life. The patient, named Derek, don't worry about HIPAA or anything like that, everything has been adjusted for privacy. Well, he came in complaining of stomach pains. Obviously, like I said, nobody gets sent to this hospital for regular stuff, so we knew it was something more. When he came in, he was clutching a half-eaten and rotting carcass of what looked like a cat. He was literally talking to us in between bites. It was a strange conversation. "Sir, is that your cat?" I asked him, thoroughly grossed out because this was my first real patient at Dearth Mercy. He lifted the cat and looked at it. "This? God no, I wouldn't eat mittens. This is, well, I don't want to say, it's disgusting." The other nurse with me, Archie, made a face. "Sir, you're eating a cat, what can be more disgusting than that?" I was kind of shocked he said that because I was taught bedside manners at my previous hospitals. But Archie had a point. "I know it's a cat," the patient exploded. "You think I don't know that? It's roadkill, okay? Cats, deer, dogs, coons, I can't stop myself from eating whatever I see on the side of the road. I'm gonna throw up." He leaned over to puke, and what came next was even worse than what he had just told me. He threw up all right, but something whipped out of his throat along with the vomit. It was like a tentacle, and it literally caught the bits of cat and bile before it could hit the ground, and pulled it all back into his throat. The man made a nasty slurring and gobbling sound as it went straight back into him. I thank God did not have any tentacles inside me, so when I reactively threw up, it all did hit the ground. I couldn't stop it. Seeing that, smelling that, I didn't stand a chance. Archie wasn't new, it didn't make him throw up, but he did step back from us and point to the bin. Jesus, aim for the fucking can next time, he ordered. Sorry, I said. I looked at the patient who was eyeing my spill on the floor. You didn't eat meat today, did you? He asked. His eyes begged me to say no. Thankfully I hadn't. Just eggs and toast, I replied. He sighed relief, then took a bite of the cat in his hand. Archie proceeded to get the man's personal information while I cleaned up my mess. We followed the standard protocol of any hospital, minus the insurance parts, and after the basics, we asked the unique questions. Have you come into contact with any cursed items? Have you made any deals with demons, genies, witches, minor deities or gods, etc.? Have you consumed human flesh in the last 48 hours? Have you seen anything strange or unusual outside of your current symptoms? Have you recently moved to a new town/house where strange things occur? This one was a hit. Yes. New town. I thought it was just a weird group or something at first, but they pray to a streetlight in the mornings, he said, chewing on the meat of the cat. Archie turned to me. By now my sickness was cleaned up and I was standing by learning. So, some towns generally have either a cult or even the whole town, they'll have a deal with a creature or horror of some kind and have to perform some kind of ritual. It's important to get as much info on the ritual as we can so the lab can determine what the horror is and how to treat it. Then he handed me the clipboard. You finish this, I'll see if Dr. Mathos is available. Then he exited the room, calmly and casually as if he saw things like this all the time. I know now that's exactly the case. I turned to Derek and offered a friendly, reassuring smile. Okay, can you tell me what time they pray to the light? I asked. Fifth story. This story was shared by you/Sigmundus_. I have a theory that jinns, demons and skinwalkers are the same entities. To those who have never heard about them, it might feel a bit uneasy to hear that there is an entirely different species living among us, acing us in matters pertaining to physical strength. I am talking about jinns, pronounced as jayins. A creation much attributed to exist in Islamic folklore, even though they have existed way before the advent of Islam. Where are they now? Jinns have long been here since before humanity even set foot on this world. You gotta shake off the whole theory of evolution to absorb this. Living in clans and colonies, they used to roam the continents salvaging the resources of Earth. Until humans arrived. According to Islamic religious texts, jinns were concealed from humans and instructed to live in mountains, valleys, and all the places of wilderness. They were made to leave all other places for humans, for they were decreed to dwell on earth from henceforth. According to some sources, human eyes have a membrane that prevents us from seeing them at will. Jinns still live among us concealed from our vision. On the contrary, they can choose to reveal themselves to us at will. Not fair, right? What do they look like? According to Islamic religious texts, humans were created from clay, whereas the entire species of jinns were created from smokeless fire. They are formless creatures since fire cannot be molded into a definite form, but they can assume any shape and form. While we humans take pride in our intellectual abilities, the unique abilities of jinns include their strength. Jinns are mighty strong and have great heights. Their facial features vary in various races. Yes, jinns have different races among them too. One common physical feature is that most of them have hooves instead of regular feet and horns on the top of their heads. Do jinns possess supernatural powers? Apart from enormous strength, jinns also have supernatural powers. Of which one is of course shape-shifting. They can transform themselves into any shape or form. Based on accounts of Muslim scholars of Baghdad and Cairo from 11th century, jinns mostly assume forms of snakes, lizards, dogs or other canines. Some jinns have abilities to control weather over a small area, summoning storms and lightning. They are said to have the ability of moving extremely fast, covering hundreds of miles in seconds. The most disturbing fact is that jinns can possess human bodies. Yup, folks, you gotta watch out for yourself. Are jinns immortal? Seems like even after all those perks, jinns do have weaknesses. The greatest of them being death itself. Jinns have been known to live hundreds of years. Now vampires have a foe in town. But they can be killed, they can die in fights, and they can die of old age. How do they live? Just as humans, jinns have learned that by living together they can sustain themselves. Much like a normal human city or colony, jinns have their own cities and colonies in mountains, jungles and valleys. Nowadays, they are also often found dwelling in abandoned human homes. The fact that a house becomes haunted after being left uninhabited for some time is because of the nomadic jinns who have taken over. Jinns have religions like humans, they have races as humans, and they speak different languages just as we humans do. So you might encounter an immigrant Muslim jinn from Syria in the United States talking to an American jinn who is a Christian or a Jew. Amazing, right? Much like human interactions, jinns also interact and communicate with jinns of other regions, exchanging goods and information. They even travel to each other's places. What do they eat? According to scriptures, jinns eat charcoal or burnt wood. They also have tamed animals, which are definitely not your average cows, goats, camels, etc. The jinn animals have been known to eat filth and animal droppings. Modern paranormal activities and jinn. Now that we have a background about jinns, you might as well try to fit this creation in modern definitions of cryptids, demons, ghosts, etc. According to my theories and research, I believe jinns and the entity demons. Jinns also resemble the entities described in several Native American folklores such as the famous skinwalker. Skinwalkers have always been seen as an overly large-sized canine, which we know is the form assumed by jinns. Most of other American legends such as the Mothman or the Wendigo might as well be jinns. But why America? North America was the last continent to be discovered on Earth. Before European settlers, North America was just plain wilderness with only a few Native Americans living there as compared to the vastness of the continent itself. Much of the space was untouched by human hands, which makes perfect sense as to why majority of this species would choose to inhabit the Americas. As our numbers are increasing day to day, we have been provoking them by taking their territories, hence we find examples of curses over certain pieces of land in Native American folklore which exist to this day. These places have all kinds of strange and paranormal phenomenon occurring there to ward off humans. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.